Hi, my name is Dan Richard. This is the 2016 Promotion and Tenure panel. And serving on the panel today, we have Provost Dr. Earl Trainum. He is the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs. We also have John Hatley. He is the Secretary of the United Faculty of Florida and also a professor in biology. Chris Webb is also on the panel. She is a professor in the Exceptional Deaf and Interpreter Education Department. And Radha Piatti, she is a chair and professor of chemistry. And I've given these individuals some questions to address for the panel, and we will also have a time of question and answer at the end. All right, so let's get started.
Promotion and tenure probably is accompanied by about as much anxiety as anything that you'll go through in your academic career, and I'll let John and Chris and Radha tell you how difficult it is. I'm going to try to ease your anxiety. I think really every year since I've been at UNF, we hire better and better faculty. And yet I think the faculty worry more and more about promotion and tenure as time goes on. I can tell you you're extremely well qualified, and if not, you wouldn't be here. We fully expect you to be successful in your promotion and tenure process. We have a lot of things in place that are designed to give you early indications of how you're doing. You have tenure reviews, you have, of course, annual performance appraisals, and all of these things are designed to give you feedback of how well you're doing. And so most of the people, while they worry, most of the people have a pretty good idea of how they're going to fare in the promotion and tenure process before they start. Of course, nothing is final until it's final, until you get that letter from the president that says congratulations. Or in the case of tenure, the letter from the Board of Trustees, it says congratulations. But most of you will have a pretty good idea before you go up. In fact, you probably already have a pretty good idea. I hope that you do. Let me give you some numbers that ought to be a little reassuring. This past year we had 27 people that were being considered by the University Promotion and Tenure Committee for promotion to associate and tenure. Of those, 26 were promoted and tenured. Those are pretty good odds. We had 9 people that they considered for promotion to full professor. Of those, 8 were promoted. We had 3 that were considered for, actually not by this committee because they have a slightly different process in the library, but 3 that were up for promotion to university librarian. All 3 were successful. And then we had, for the first time ever, we have a promotion ladder for instructors, and there were 5 people eligible and considered, and 4 of those were successful. So again, the odds are way in your favor. Occasionally there's someone that knows by the time they get to this stage in their academic career they're not going to be successful, and so I won't say that some of the people just don't go up. They resign and go somewhere else or find another job. But most of the people that get to that point of applying and going up through the process, the vast majority are successful because you've done what we've asked you to do and clearly what you're capable of doing. And we try to provide ample support to make that a successful process. So expect to be successful. It's also a psychological thing. Once you go through this process of putting together your dossier and you have these binders in front of you that tell your life story and what you've done, you're convinced you're really, really good. You can't help but have that happen when you have these letters and stacks of letters telling you how wonderful you are. So you'll believe it, and hopefully the committee will agree. all the various committees will agree. Some of you may have heard that we have been considering going to an e-P&T process where the dossier would be an electronic document, and we will go to that. Whether or not we go to it for this next promotion and tenure cycle is still uncertain, just because of the budget. This year is going to be, or this coming year is going to be very, very tight, and whether or not we feel like it's a good idea to spend, forget around $30,000 or $35,000 for this is still a decision that we haven't made. So we hope to make that decision very soon, in the next couple of weeks, and in plenty of time for you to know which way to go in terms of preparing your dossier. But right now, there's still a process going on where you're invited to go and look at the videos and play around with the two electronic P&T software packages that a committee is looking at. And so if you have any questions about that, I would encourage you to go out and take a look at that. I can give you the website if you want to write this down. It's Talon, like an osprey's talon, unf.edu/collaboration/PT dossier/. And if you forget that, contact Gordon Rakita, who is chairing that task force that's looking at that and going through the intent to negotiate process, the ITN process. So I don't want to take up any more time. If you have questions after the panelists have made their presentations, I'm happy to, questions that might be addressed to me, I'm happy to try to answer those. But John and Chris both served on the University P&T committee last year, and you've been on it, I think, for 2 years. Have you been on it too as well? Just one, I thought, yeah. So they have a lot of content information that I think will be very useful to you. And if after they're finished, if there's something that comes to my mind about the content, I'll chime in at that point. So I don't want to take up any more time. I'll turn it over to you, John.
Okay. Thanks for inviting me to be on the panel. So I've been asked to primarily address scholarship and try to identify, exactly what does it mean to be excellent in scholarship. And so obviously one of the reasons that's the $1 million question is because it's so varied across our campus, and we have so many different disciplines. And so if I can put on my UFF hat for a second, that's exactly the reason why we have in our contract a guidelines article. And obviously right now, many of our departments are going through the process of developing guidelines that try to identify and give folks going up for promotion and tenure some notion of whether they have accomplished, enough different products, quality of products that would merit promotion to associate professor. You folks that I'm looking at right now are probably an audience of people that are planning on going up next year, and so that kind of puts you in a little bit of a delicate position, because your departments are probably trying to identify what they think is appropriate for qualifications for promotion and tenure, and you are as yet uncertain as to whether those guidelines will be accepted and agreed upon by the time you go up. And also, they're only, I guess the other thing I'll say is that they're only guidelines. The term guideline is meant to reflect the fact that this is an approximation of the number of products and the quality of products that should be produced, but it's by no means a black and white situation. So it's very clear in the contract that the guidelines cannot be a formula. It cannot be publish this many papers, you're golden. It's always left up to the people reviewing you, whether it's at the department level, with your department colleagues, the chair, the dean, the university P&T committee, the provost, or the president, all of those levels are there so that those people can, interpret the guidelines and evaluate your dossier in that light. And so there's plenty of room for interpretation of quality at that point. So because I guess to put a positive spin on it as well, I want to point out that because departments are now undergoing those conversations, and I think most departments are, certainly UFF would recommend that all departments try to establish some sort of guidelines. Because so many departments are undergoing those conversations right now, you probably can start to get a pretty good idea from your colleagues what they, expect to see for somebody going up for tenure. And in fact, my department is doing that right now. Or one thing I put a little bit of time into earlier this day is looking at the first, second draft that our department has of our guidelines for the for the faculty to discuss. So what it means to be excellent in research, to attain tenure and promotion to associate professor is going to vary a lot from department to department. But I think that the processes that are in place are at least making those expectations, those expectations are now being talked about, and they're becoming more and more clear around campus. One thing that I've heard my entire career at UNF is that, and experienced it myself also as an assistant professor, is that people are always experiencing some trepidation about, it's a moving target, it's unclear what the expectations are, and that's pretty normal to experience in your situation. But I hope that the fact that the conversations are kind of going on campus-wide now about what would be expected would give you a little bit better perspective on whether you're there or not. And as Earl said, I really like that statement about once you put all that evidence together of your career of work, it can be kind of an ego boost, and it can make you feel like, okay, I've got it. I was also asked to address what scholarly activity should look like for those applying for early tenure, and that's a pretty simple question because the expectation is that it's just the same total amount of work as if you went up by at the deadline. There's no higher bar for the rate of productivity. There's also no, for the total amount of productivity, there's also no lower bar by going up early. The total amount of productivity is supposed to be the same as if you went up during the normal time frame. And just kind of a more realistic view on that is whether or not people who review dossiers actually take that into account. And I would say that the majority of people that I've, in my opinion, do apply that appropriately. There's some who kind of seem to deviate from that a little bit, but I would say they are definitely in the minority. The one other thing I'll say at this point before I pass it on to my colleagues on the panel is that your dossier is going to be looked at by a pretty large number of people, all from different walks of life in the university. And so the two things that you really need to keep in mind when you do that is that you're communicating to a pretty wide audience. And as we start to take questions, I'll provide more detail on this. But in my opinion, you should think about certain parts of your dossier being targeted to your department colleagues, other parts targeted towards the dean, and other parts targeted toward the university committee, the provost, and people who have less close, who are not tied as closely to your particular subdiscipline. It's not likely that many members of the P&T committee are going to read your entire research statement. And one thing that I always thought of when I was putting together my dossier is, if that group is reading every word in my research statement, then I must be in trouble already, okay? They're going to look at the summarized information first. perhaps your department colleagues will read the entire research statement, word for word, because they can understand it, because they're in the same discipline. Also, because at that level, that's the degree to which they should be evaluating the dossier. Should be evaluating it closely enough so that they, because they don't have 30 to look at, they have 1 or 2 to look at, and they have the expertise, so they are the ones who should be reading that research statement. So you need to think about different parts of the dossier being targeted at different audiences. And the second thing that I'll say under the kind of the headline of the fact that many different people from different walks of life at the university will be looking at your dossier is to remind you how important it is to be complete and honest in any reporting of what you've done. Very little gets past the university committee, and I would suspect very little gets past department committees that is not well annotated. So for publications with multiple authors, list all the authors and show where you fall in the authorship order. Explain that. In different disciplines, it has different meaning. Sometimes it's first author or nothing. In other disciplines, it's pretty much equal. In other disciplines, first and last are most important. Make sure that you explain that, because it's that type of summarized information, like your CV, that the university committee is going to be looking at most closely. Another example of that is if you've got a collaborative grant, make sure you say how much of the funds are yours and are coming to UNF, and how much are going to either your colleagues at UNF or to another institution. So make sure that you're very honest and complete in putting together your dossier, because when I'm thinking about the university committee, everybody sort of takes a different approach to looking at that dossier. If there's 30 dossiers, nobody in the committee is going to read every word of every dossier. Everybody's going to tackle what they're going to try to get out of it in a different way. But once you start having those conversations of the entire committee together, you can see the different parts that people have read, and you don't sneak anything by. So you need to be forthright when you put it together. And with that, I'll let Chris speak for a while, and then be happy to add more to what I said if there's questions on that topic.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here today with you. I thought as I was talking about teaching, I would divide my remarks into a couple different parts. Sitting on the tenure committee for the university, some of the teaching sections that people submit are pretty short. They include kind of what they taught and their ISQs. And so today, what I'm going to talk about is how to elaborate on those pieces of information, what to look at, and to make your teaching narrative really vibrant and reflective of who you are as a professional. So I'm going to talk about your evidence of work in curriculum development. That's certainly a part that you can talk about in your teaching. Also, student assessments, how to look at those and how to use those and weave them in your narrative. The use of peer assessments, which I am such a believer in that concept of doing peer assessments, and then lots on self-assessments too. And what I did before I put these things together was look at our CBA to see that the things that I was talking about today were certainly in alignment, and I feel comfortable that they are, and will help you in all ways of evaluation, whether it's your annual evaluation or whether it's putting together your dossier. So I think those are really important concepts to look at. When I think about evidence of work in curriculum development, I think developing or teaching a new course and preparing it or teaching a course that's not been offered for several years, I think that is important to explain in your narrative. We don't, as university committee members, we don't understand a lot of the nuances in all your courses. So it's up to you to explain to us why setting up a new course and why giving life to an old course, what you did to make that come alive, and explaining it to us in a way that lay people can understand just what you did with that course and why that was such a, I know we've all had that job, and it's a gigantic task. So write it and tell about it. I think it's important in face-to-face courses, hybrid courses, online courses. And a note on online courses, if you did training through CERT or other entities that allowed you to make an online course more engaging to your learners, have better student outcomes, anything that you did to enhance student learning by taking professional development training yourself, I think that's really valuable. But explain it to us in your narrative too. Describe ways in which the things you did in those classes enhanced your student learning and ensured those positive outcomes we're all looking for too. So I think those are really important in course development. And then even in a single course, if you revise or develop a new module, a teaching module, which more of us are going to now, that is a tremendous amount of work too. So again, explain to us what that module is going to do to improve our students' outcomes, keep them in, how it keeps students in your programs, why you did it. Talk about those kinds of things because those are really important. And then explain any revisions you did and tell why you did those revisions. Was it based on students telling you or needs assessment? Was it your observation of their work or your analyses of their exam or written work that caused you to do this module in a different way? That's reflective practice. And that's what we all want to do in our teaching, is look at what's happening in outcomes, reflect on it, and change as needed. Or maybe in your particular field, there have been some recent publications or recent data that indicate some new processes that are more effective. Our students need to know about that, but explain that to us in the narrative. I think that becomes such a powerful piece then, and it validates, it gives value to hard work that we put in course development, because it is hard work if you do it well. Perhaps you added a field component or a mentoring element, new technology or current technology, or a TLO. Again, explain how those elements strengthened your instruction, why you did it, why this is going to be a big help, not only to you as the professional in the class, but your students and their futures too. I think that's really important too. Another thing that is valued in course development and curriculum development certainly is instructional innovation. Why you put innovative features in a particular class too. I think it's important to link and connect any innovation you do to evidence-based practice, what we know works. Otherwise, it's kind of a flash in the pan kind of fun thing to play with. But unless you can use it for your own research, you tie it in as much as you can too. Use it in your innovation, in your own research, or your own service. But have reasons for tying that innovation in, and then take the time to explain why that innovation is in there. Is it based on needs? Have your students told you? Why is it in there? And why is that teaching strategy innovative in your field? That could be something that really deserves a lot of explanation. A particular teaching strategy may be very unique to your field. Explain to us why. And again, tie it to research agendas, involving your students in research, all of those things with innovation can really have some promising results for everyone concerned. Ultimately, student outcomes and our own advancement in research, too. Another area I'd like to talk to you about, too, is the value of student assessment. And I'm sure you've heard this, but ISQs are not the only game in town, right? We know that. We know that ISQs are not the only game in town. They're not the only measurement of our teaching. But so many times we get dossiers that really that's the only indication of how the person is doing. Now, we can use ISQs. Let me give you an example. A couple years ago, I noticed trends and patterns in a particular area of the ISQs in a particular undergraduate class I was teaching. It's a tough class where we discuss curriculum, and we do lots and lots of assignments, lots of written assignments that are not on computer, they're thinking assignments. And I noticed a pattern over the years that my evaluations from my students of expressions of expectations for performance in the class were lower than where the means were lower than my other numbers. And that was a pattern over several years. So something was going on there. Either I didn't explain it well in the syllabus, or I didn't articulate it well in class. So rather than just looking at my numbers, I really tried to do some reflective thinking about what those numbers meant and tried some different ways and modified my syllabus and my course based on that stated need from my students. And that was really, really helpful. In the ensuing years, I noticed that not only that number got better, but more importantly, the students were understanding the bottom line of what I wanted to greater degrees. So that was a use of the ISQs other than just plopping them down on a report. It was doing some analyses, and that was important to me. I require my students to meet with me one-on-one at least once during the semester. And one of the questions, and I keep track of these data too, one of the first questions I ask them when I sit down after we've chatted a few minutes is, tell me, what can I do to make your learning more meaningful? And have them talk to me about that. Or if you could change anything about the class, what would you change? This kind of stuff takes a lot of time. I won't deny that. But I think the payoff is amazing. Sometimes I have some kids come in groups, and we sit and talk in a little group that way. But I have found asking students that question is powerful. And I can keep those data. I use it as kind of an informal needs assessment, really. And it's really impacted the way I teach some of my classes. It's had a profound effect on that. Let's see. Don't discount midterm assessments. Some departments have a formal midterm assessment. Others don't. We have one. I rarely use it. Sometimes I make up my own because I want to know where the students are at a particular point in the semester. One year, I had the students design a midterm assessment. And that was kind of interesting to do. And I think all of those things showed me where the course was going and how I could grow as a professional. And that to me is so paramount to what we do because that will impact our student outcomes. So midterm assessments, either design your own, informal, formal from your department, whatever you can see. Then another thing to do, you can do a lot with informal assessments at the end of a big chunk of information in your classes, is just ask the students, on a scale of 1 to 10, where is your learning with this? And you can then, in your narrative or in your annual reports, you can talk about if everybody's hanging around a 4 or 5 on a particular concept that's real key to your field, that's something that can require some real a need for innovation or a need for revision. Make sense? I have had a lot of fun doing that and seeing just exactly where students are at in their own progress. And then that helps me become a better professional to address their needs. Peer assessment is my next big thing. Ask peers in your department. One year in our department, we all paired off. And that was really effective. I wish we would have written about it, but we didn't. We worked in teaching pairs. And I think that that lowered the anxiety about having someone else in your classroom with you, because my students got used to my partner, and her students got used to me being in there. Sometimes it was just a little tiny snippet of instruction that I wanted to make sure I was getting across, and she had the same going on. So that peer mentoring assessment, peer mentoring was really powerful in that way. But certainly ask people who know your field to come in and give you an observation. You can go to Dan at the Office of Faculty Enhancement. He has checklists. He has all sorts of observation formats, just lots and lots of things. Plus, you can ask him to come in and do an observation for you too, and he's fabulous with that. So think about getting other ways of assessing your teaching other than just ISQs and listing the courses you teach. And then lastly, and this is the scary one for me, video yourself. Ugh, terrible. But let me tell you how I got started on doing this. I've always videotaped myself, and I hate doing it each and every time. But one semester I was teaching a graduate class, and I had both a student who was totally blind and a student who was totally deaf in the same class, along with 3 students for whom English was not their first language. It was like, it wasn't a diversity class, but it was a study in diversity. It was just a hoot to teach, and it made me a better teacher. So what I did was video myself, and I turned down the sound, because I turned off the sound when I watched myself, because I wanted to see what I looked like and the things I did to enhance learning for my student who could not hear. And I was doing stupid things that I should know better, like getting in front of the interpreter or not turning on the closed caption. I mean, come on. But I watched, and it was an eye-opening experience, just little things. I also did the same where I just audio taped myself to get the experience that my student who was blind was having. And I found myself doing things like I'd ask a question in class, and instead of saying, okay, Christy, answer that, I would say, yes. Well, guess what? My student who is blind can't see that I'm saying, yes, go ahead. I caught myself doing a lot of those things alongside the video, which you just learn so much about yourself in teaching. So those are some little points that I would like to give you, and as you videotape yourself, then write about that experience in your narrative. How did you grow? What did you change? How did you evolve as a professional? Okay?
I'm Radha Piatti of the Department of Chemistry, and Dan asked me to speak about service in a P&T dossier or in a promotion dossier. And so I think if you have the same program I do, you have a couple of questions there. And the first is, what does it mean to demonstrate continuous and meaningful service? And so when a candidate comes up for P&T, or sometimes just P, promotion to professor, that continuous and meaningful service is usually some combination of service to the department, the college, the university, the community, and the profession. And so each of those has different meaning in your career, and I'll describe that in just a second. But the wisdom that you've probably heard that service usually doesn't make or break a tenure candidacy is correct. In my career, and maybe those of you who've done it, other things can refute this, I've never seen a candidate denied tenure on the basis of service. It has only ever happened on the basis of scholarship or teaching. So in order to do sufficient service to earn tenure, a candidate usually wants to serve their department in the important work that the business that the department has to get done. The college and or the university, this is the unit outside the department, and so there are elements of doing that business that you may wish to participate in. Service to the community generally counts when it's related to your professional area, so doing things related to whatever it is your academic discipline is. Service to the profession is kind of a special situation because service to the profession, things like reviewing journal articles, grant proposals, things like that, show your committee and your chair that your professional opinion is valued outside of your institution. So there's a real worth to doing some reviewing and to asking journals sometimes if you can do the reviewing in order to show again that your professional opinion is important. I think if you're a good reviewer that does a thorough job and does that in a timely fashion, you start getting a lot of papers to review, and there's a time that it's okay to decide that it's time to start declining those. When I was associate professor, I used to get like 2 articles at a time from a journal that wanted them back in 3 weeks, and I had a new child, and I'm like, I've amply demonstrated that my professional opinion matters, and I'm going to start declining some of these review requests. So, when you've shown it, that's fine. Department, college, and university service are probably what you're familiar with. The committee service that you've all done, search committees, things like that. I guess what I would say in the big picture for what is continuous and meaningful service is that you have shown an ongoing level of participation as a citizen of your unit, of the university, and of your profession, that it's been ongoing. It doesn't have to be heroic, but it has to be ongoing. And as I said, candidates are generally not declined on the basis of service. The only place a candidate can go wrong, in my view, with service is if they give the impression that they do zero service. And so if a candidate does zero service and kind of makes it clear that they're only here to do research and teaching, that those actions are observed by members of the committee and the department who kind of need everyone to shoulder a little of the load. Maybe not a lot of the load, but a little of the load. So no candidate wants to be the one that has done no service and sort of take the heat of that. The second question on here is, what advice would you provide to tenure track faculty about balancing service with other responsibilities? And the first point I would say is that hopefully your department chairs keep those service loads light. Most chairs try to keep service light for the assistant professors coming up for in their tenure years. There are hopefully enough associate and full professors that they can carry most of the chairpersonships and the heavy load, and the assistant professors have a short probationary period in which to prove their, to establish their scholarship and their teaching practices. Often responsibilities do increase upon earning of tenure because then the associate professors and the full professors take on more of the business of running the university than the assistant professors do. Another element of balancing those things is to choose the service that you do based on criteria that are important to you. One of those is to try to choose committees that actually serve your interests. If you're a research hound, like you are absolutely crazy about your research and you want to support other faculty doing research, serving on the research committee makes sense. If your abiding passion is teaching, then doing service in that area is of interest. If your abiding passion is about the student experience, select service that serves that, but then you don't have to do something in every other area. You should learn something too while you are serving the department, college, university, etc. The other element of choosing your service is to try to choose something where you don't try to choose something where you don't know a lot of the other people on the committee. One of the values of serving on college and university committees is that you meet people outside your department, some of whom will pop up on the P&T committee or will know someone on the P&T committee. So that's one of the values of the larger scale committees. You don't have to sign up for a ton of them, but a few, so that people outside your department know who you are, know that you show up, know that you read whatever it is you're supposed to read. There's a real value to that, having a few people outside the department that know you. So that's an element of choosing your service. And the third thing I would say is, and I say this as a chair who has received this and offered this, is that when you have to do an additional service responsibility, something that came up unexpectedly that's more than you originally had planned, particularly in your pre-tenure years, you need to be ready to ask for a trade. Okay, so you need to tell your chair, and I've had faculty tell me this, and I have offered this to my faculty, I need you to do something that we originally hadn't planned for you to do. I have a search committee that I absolutely need you on. And so when I do that, or when a faculty comes to me, I tell them, or I ask them, is there something you would like to set aside from your docket this year in order that you do this? Because this thing that I need you to do is terribly important this year. And so you should be prepared to do that as a candidate, respectfully. You know, chairs will do their best to accommodate that, I think. I think they make it possible wherever it's possible, but I think a savvy candidate needs to be aware of that as a technique to protect their time for research and teaching. And I think those are the things I have to say about service.
Thank you all. And so now we have a time for question and discussion. And so we'll open up. See, we already have some people here.
Okay. Thank you all for the panel. It's really helpful and comforting to have a sense of guidelines. My questions are for John. The first question, I guess I have 3 questions, so bear with me. They're all short. The first question is on the sheet here. It said that you would talk a little bit about applying for tenure, quote unquote, early. I'm just curious about that process. Personally, I deferred the position for a year for a postdoc, so I've been told I have the option to go up in my 5th or 6th year. I'm not sure if that counts as early or if there are different standards, so I'm curious about early. You also mentioned that to gear your certain parts of your dossier to different audiences, and you said the P&T committee will mostly read the summary, and I was curious if that was the summary that we provide in our dossier or the summary that the department committee gives to the P&T board after reviewing our documents. And the third question is about departmental guidelines. Does a department, I'm in the English department, and so we value monographs, books, and I was personally curious if the P&T committee clarifies between a book that is under full contract, complete, revised, but not yet out on the bookshelves, and a book that is out on the bookshelves, or is that just up to the department to decide? So those are the 3. Thank you.
Okay. So the first question was about applying early. And actually, Mark Workman always pointed out that there's no such thing as applying early. When the contract says you can apply, you can apply. But applying after your 3rd or 4th year is allowed. Right? You were shaking your head. I thought you knew something I didn't know. Okay. So applying after your 3rd or 4th year is allowed. If you apply in your 3rd year and step back from the process, then you're not allowed to apply until your 5th year again. I believe that's still in process, or still in force. And at least in terms of scholarship, you're supposed to have the same amount of work that would be expected, whether no matter when you apply. And I think people are pretty good about trying to keep that in mind. If somebody's applying after the 3rd year, they kind of step back and go, okay, would I accept this amount of work of somebody who had been here a full 5 years? Is there something else that you're looking for? Because I'm wondering if I'm missing something in your question.
Well, Well, it just said it on the list that you were going to talk about it. I didn't know if going up in your 5th year as opposed to your 6th year counted as early, and if that was a special case. So you answered the question.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And then the second question to me seemed to be largely about what to expect the university committee to read. So I think the things that the university committee focuses on, and of course Christine can weigh in here too, is the CV and the external letters. Those two, to me, seem to be the things that they address the most. I think some people will look through the annual evaluations. I think most people will look at the letters from the department committee, the dean, and the I guess that's it at that point. But I think the focus is because other people have reviewed the dossier to that point, but the reason that the university P&T committee exists is for them to make their own opinion of it. So I think most people on the committee, in the 2 times that I've served, are pretty good about taking that to heart and saying, this is somewhat outside my discipline, but I'm going to review it as well as I can. And so the thing that really becomes important to that, to me, is the external letters, which of course the only level of control you have over that is trying to think about who would be an appropriate independent evaluator of you, who could understand your work, and if you know somebody's reputation, if they would take the time to do it properly. Because there was one person on the P&T committee in particular who repeatedly would say it's obvious that they didn't read the work, they just looked at the CV. You want an external evaluator who will actually take the time to read some of your work and be able to make an informed and expert evaluation of it.
When I looked at the narratives that folks wrote, it was when someone in the external letters or someone in the department just made a point about something that maybe was a little irregular or something that was unusual. I would go then to the narrative to see how that person explained that. That was important for me to know, because sometimes it was something that was absolutely perfectly legitimate. And after reading the narrative, I understood the whys of it. So we do, I would say it just depends on the person, doesn't it, really? But I think we all read the external letters,
Everybody takes a
departmental
slightly
letters,
different approach.
CV, and then as needed, the narratives as much as we can. Or if, as we're meeting, if we have a question, we'll sift through narratives or sift through some of those kinds of things too. So it's so important that it all be in place.
And the last question was about the department guidelines relative to works that are in progress or in process. And so you were asking whether there was a difference in how the merit of a work on the shelf versus accepted. So in the sciences, it's in press is the term, and I think I know I do, and I think most people accept something that's in press as much as actually hard copy and in print. And in the humanities, of course, the term is forthcoming, and I think that I think there were some, this is one thing that you want to clarify to people who will read your dossier that are not in your field, but I know when I was on the university committee, people in humanities had to clarify to me, forthcoming means that it's, it's being printed, it's done, it's equivalent to in-press in my field, and once I found that out, I think everybody in the committee thought that was sufficient.
Yeah. One qualifying comment I would make on that, though, with respect to monographs or books, is that quite often people want to see a review, and that may not happen until the book is actually published. Whereas with journal articles, if it's fully accepted for publication, that pretty well counts as published. But with books, there's a wide variety in the quality of books that are published, and a positive review can be very, very helpful, because it's doubtful that anybody on the committee is going to read an entire book, but they might read a review of a book to get some assessment.
I have some questions regarding the CBA. Three, really. The first one is, since most of us were hired under the CBA agreement that went out of effect in 2014, but now we have a new one, do we, I'm assuming we go by the new CBA, but I want to confirm that.
Actually, you can still go by the old.
Yeah, there is some choice. You can choose to go by the new one or the
Yeah.
old one, and that I can't remember what that cutoff is, but I'm pretty certain, that this version of the CBA is still new enough so that you could choose either
3
the new
years?
CBA
Yeah.
or the old one. It's 3 years. Thank you.
My understanding of it is that for the criteria, you can go back, if you have 3 years of tenure earning service, you can go to whatever old criteria there were. But procedurally, I think procedurally, the
Procedurally,
steps and
it's gonna be,
things,
but-
that has to be with the current CBA.
Right. It's your choice in terms of the criteria.
Kind of along those lines, what are the differences? Does anybody know, or are there too many to list or whatever? What are the differences between the old and the new as far as tenure and promotion? And the last question is, do we find everything we need in 19 and 20, those two sections? Or are there other little snippets throughout?
So I'll take the last question first. You should be able to find everything in the tenure and promotion articles regarding the process. And then, sorry, what was the other
The differences, what are the differences?
Okay, so the previous version of the CBA was much more detailed on that, and a lot of that detail came in the bylaws that were department specific. And the bylaw system became too cumbrous, and hence, with this more recent version of the CBA, the tenure promotion article is written to be able to stand on its own, and
Right.
it can stand on its own. But then there's a guidelines article that then allows departments with the chair and the dean's approval to put together, some guidelines. So I guess that's sort of the difference is that the current CBA is probably less specific, and the older one was more specific. But the guidelines then may have an effect on that as well.
Yeah, I almost would say that the opposite, so I guess we'll confuse you. I think in the promotion and tenure criteria in the current contract, I think there's more. The attempt of the bargaining process was to make it more likely that this could stand on its own, that there's enough language in here to tell people what the expectations are. The guidelines are very helpful if a department wants to say, these are the journals that we value most highly, or particularly when you get into a field that's art or music, these are the ways that we would assess quality. Then the contract that isn't very helpful in those categories. But I think there's enough in here that some departments may opt not to even do guidelines because there's a lot of information in this article.
And I see what you're saying, and in terms of just the contract itself, I think, I guess I think of the old contract as the bylaws were more required and expected, and the bylaws
Right.
and the old contract together I thought were more detailed.
That's true. The combination.
Whereas just the CBAs on their own,
Yeah.
the newer version is more detailed.
The problem is, of course, so many departments never were able to get approved bylaws, so they were a hindrance almost. But,
Other questions?
Oh, can the panel comment on, in terms of ISQs, they've recently changed this past year, and should I include all of my ISQ data from all 6 years, both the filled forms out as well as the comments, or is it better to just give representative past couple years and show how I responded to those comments? Like, is it important to include everything, the kitchen sink, and talk about it and expound on it, or is it okay to just show the past 3 years ISQ comments? Because I've seen it both ways.
I would talk that over with your chair and your department too, but what some people did was include tables of summary of some of those data of ISQs, sometimes just taking the famous question number 8 and putting that in, or grouping by averages for years, or, I think that's a personal kind of thing, as long as you show an honest and authentic effort to show what you have done and how you've grown from those data. I don't know that there's any set there, at least in my department, and there didn't seem to be when we reviewed, was it? We saw everything. We saw just listings. We saw people who just threw the tables from where you can find them on our banner to very sophisticated and complicated tables and means and mode and all those kinds of things. So that's kind of, think about what it says about your teaching or your growth in teaching. Because I don't think we have any real requirements other than you show evidence of excellent teaching. So the way you package that in your narrative is how you do that, and that's what I would do.
And I think this kind of goes back to a comment that I think maybe a couple of you made before about the university committee will not miss something. So there's no reason for you to try to hide something. So if you're giving a summary and saying, hey, I just want to summarize, here's a couple of years that makes sense for me to summarize. If there's a question, I can guarantee you that someone will find your ISQ. So if it's in other words, if you're trying to not include data so that certain data is not included so that it doesn't look bad on your record,
Right.
There's absolutely no way that won't be found out, and it could end up turning around and reflecting negatively on you as if you were trying to hide something. So it's better to kind of include information, but I agree is that that notion of how do you represent your teaching,
Right.
how do you explain this excellence in teaching is the
And
key.
I can think of several times, John, when we were looking at folks who started out with kind of mediocre teaching scores, and as they worked on it and they talked about it in their narrative, specific things they talked about, and told why there was an increase in them. And it wasn't just based on the ISQ scores, it was based on their growth in a broader perspective. So people I think it's really good to be honest and reflect what the true authentic picture is.
That's a really good point. If your ISQ data is very, very consistent, then it's one thing to summarize. What you don't want to have happen is to summarize, and as Dan said, have someone, your department chair or whatever, in their letter saying, the ISQ data reported in the dossier reflects this. However, what wasn't mentioned was that on question 8 they averaged only a 1.5 in this year or in that course or whatever. You don't want to miss an opportunity to explain something if you have a good explanation for it. So put it in there and explain it. And if it's very consistent, you're okay summarizing data. But if it's not consistent, cover it. Because the committee can be very, we all need forgiveness for things, right? And we all have times when we're better and worse than others. And so put it in there, and if you have a good explanation for it, then it's better to explain it than to have it begging for an explanation and people make up their own.
So my question is from promotion from associate to full, and I don't want to waste the whole group's time if I'm the only one. Is it okay?
You're not
All
the
right.
only one.
Oh, okay. All right. So I have two questions. The first is, I think for all of you, but specifically administrative work from associate to full. So I know, Rada, you may have dealt with this in your dossier. Where is the appropriate place to speak to administrative positions, chair, et cetera. So it doesn't really fit, I guess, I mean, unless one wants to think of it as service, I don't know. But it's a lot of service. But so that's just done, right? So I just wanted to get an opinion both from Rod, having probably included that in your dossier, and then from a committee perspective, where would you think one should deal with that?
There was a fair bit to describe, but I did put it in service.
Okay.
Because it wasn't teaching or research.
No, I know. So I know someone who did a separate, kind of a separate category. I know Karen did a separate, so I don't know.
I think the thing I would try to emphasize with it is the mentoring, of pure mentoring, because to me, one consistent theme of everything we do at UNF, whether it's, in scholarship, if we involve students, teaching, there's a mentoring theme throughout it. And I think that might be one way to play it.
Okay. And then I have just one quick second question, and that is, again, from associate to full, obviously there's a time in which you can do that, you can make that. Is there any distinction in one's dossier for how long it's been from associate to full? Is the expectation similar as if you're going up, you either have enough or you don't? Or do the expectations change the longer time that goes from one promotion to the next?
So that's one thing I thought there was a variety of views from the committee on. And some people, really thought it's just the total number, and if it took you 20 years, fine. And then there were others who wanted to see a more, steady rate of productivity more recently. To me, the thing that kind of unifies those is you want to make it clear that you've got a theme in your scholarship, and that there is something that you are recognized for, and sometimes that's easier to do in a if it's come out in a relatively short period of time and a more steady rate of productivity. But if it's been over a longer period, if there's a unifying theme, you really want to make sure you get that through, I think, because and certainly, if you had a chair position, there's a good, a clear explanation as to why you were pulled away from your scholarship.
Does the committee in general recognize that?
I think
think
that's
so.
one of those cases where administrative responsibilities can be an explanation of why it might have taken
Taken
longer
long.
to
Yeah.
accumulate a body of research that's sufficient to go up for full. More so than giving you credit for administrative
It
duties, which is
explains.
really, it is service. They're going to say, it's going to be teaching and scholarship, and you're going to have to be outstanding in those categories, but we understand that
May have taken
being
you
an
longer.
administrator is taking you longer to do the scholarship.
Thank you.
I would say too, Jen, that one thing we talked about a lot on the committee when folks were going up to professor is what is the impact of the scholarship? Is it are you identifying yourself as a person with national prominence and who is known for a particular kind of branch of research or area of expertise? And does your work show a maturity and evolution towards that, which yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
All right, we have a question from Phil.
Yeah, I have a couple of follow-ups on the question of promotion to full. First of all, because of the flexibility of the timing, I've been told that it's better to wait until you think you're in a very, very secure position. Basically, wait until it's a slam dunk, is the way it was expressed. So I'm wondering whether you endorse that concept, first of all. And second of all, in terms of the process, because it is kind of optional when you choose to go up for full, is it possible to begin the process and then, let's say, if you don't get good results at the department stage, to withdraw an application without prejudice?
Absolutely. You can withdraw up until the president issues his letter without any penalty or any negative consequences. So that part's easy.
I don't think is there, if you go up for full and fail, I don't think there's any. Yeah, there's no repercussions. You could go up the next year. So, they'll,
Yeah, you have tenure.
it's the
so.
thickness of your skin is the
still
issue
here.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. No one likes to be rejected, however. Yeah, I tend to agree with people that it's better to go up when you know you're reasonably certain you're going to get it, rather than sort of testing the waters. Because again, no one does like rejection, and you're already tenured. Aside from the raise that comes along with it, it's not going to change your life dramatically. So I think it's better to go up when you're very confident and you get good feedback all the way through.
Other questions?
Let me say one other thing that has been a problem, I will say, every year, and these committee members can chime in and correct me if they wish, and that's the letters. You have limited control over these letters. You're asked to give names of people who can assess your scholarship to your department chair, and your department chair invites some of these people to do that. Some will refuse. Some will do a poor job. They really are important. And it's important, number one, that they have no real connection to you, except that you're in the same discipline. They should not have been former professors, even if they've gone to another school from where you got your degree. That doesn't remove the fact they were a former professor. They shouldn't certainly be co-authors. They certainly shouldn't have served on your dissertation committee. And yet that happens almost every year. That somebody will have letters, and I'm telling you, these people on this committee, Dan is right, they find out everything. They never fail to find this stuff out. And particularly if they get the least inkling of something may be wrong, they all turn into really good detectives. And so they find stuff out. And then they develop an attitude. And so far, they have never said, we refuse to deal with this dossier because these letters are from people that should not be in here. But I keep waiting for them 1 year to say just that. People know what the rules are, and this person violated the rules, and we're not going to deal with it. And you don't want to be that person. So make sure that these letters are from the right kind of people to begin with, and hopefully that they're good. If they're not good letters, I would say encourage your chair to try to get some letters that are helpful.
I was going to say that the chair can, once the chair gets the letters, if they are not well written, they
Yep.
can either not include it or seek a better letter or.
Seek a better letter, yeah. I mean, once it's in there, and you can't take it out.
So the chair cannot remove a letter that is not supported.
I don't think so. Once it goes
Once
in,
it
I
comes
don't
in.
think.
No. I mean, in other words, once it's received, am I correct in that? Like, in other words, a chair that receives a letter from an external reviewer, in my understanding, is obligated to place that letter in the dossier. Is that correct, or?
It's
I
my
don't know
understa-
the answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's my understanding that if we solicit a letter and receive it, it goes into the dossier. That the chair does not take the executive
Okay.
decision to edit what letters go in and what.
That-
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but that probably makes sense.
No, I mean, but to edit the selection of the letters, like once they're out, I mean, sometimes we ask people and we never get it. But if we get it, it goes in.
But if it's no good, they should try to get another one. Now, time becomes an issue, I understand, but, yeah.
So the story is you'd rather have 2 supportive letters and 1 negative letter as opposed to 1 supportive letter and 1 negative letter. Right.
Yes?
You can also, hopefully I'm speaking correctly, but if you get a negative letter and the candidate, as they have the right to respond to that. So they can respond to anything in the dossier
Right.
to talk about that. So
That's correct.
Yeah, maybe some chairs can also speak about whether the letter writers follow the instructions or not. I mean, like, what happens if you get a letter where the letter writer did not follow the instructions that were provided? Do you have any thoughts about that?
My experience with this is that when I ask the letter writers, we actually receive a boilerplate letter that tells the reviewer, the external reviewer, that they are not to determine tenurability at their institution.
Right.
And we remind them of that over and over. You aren't determining whether this person would get tenure at your place, you're just describing the quality of the scholarship. In my experience of this, which is limited, the letters I've received have been about the quality of the scholarship. Sometimes if it's positive, they've said, this actually would earn tenure at my institution. But I haven't seen this wouldn't get tenure at my institution that I then have to figure out how to counter or go back to the letter writer and say anything.
I think more often you just get a neutral letter that's not glowing and it's not negative. It just doesn't really say much of anything. I think that's, in my experience, I wouldn't say I've gotten bad letters, but they're just not great letters. So they don't do much for the person. So having one that is more supportive is helpful.
Yeah, my experience is they're all over the board. And
And-
some of
and-
them will say, this person deserves tenure. This person is doing great work. And their teaching, by the way, I understand is really, really good. And when you didn't even ask that question, and you don't even know how they would know that, but then you start to get suspicious. Did we have drinks together at a conference or something? And that's how you came by that information. But there's a huge variety in the quality of these letters and the usefulness.
Sorry, one other question. Regarding these letters, if you are an interdisciplinary scholar, should you try to get 2 reviewers from each discipline that you work in?
I would say at least one. I mean, I can't remember if there's a limit to the number of scholars that the candidate can recommend to the chair. But I wouldn't make it 2. I would make it 8 to 10, and make that the ratio of that the ratio that you see yourself as. If it's 50-50, then 5 of each. Is what I would recommend, because it is difficult to get. I mean, it's a lot of work to write these letters, and so it is difficult to get people to write these letters. And if you get a 50% response rate, that's really pretty good.
And one thing
so-
just to add, just as the chairperson, it's what position you're being tenured in. So I think that's the case that you have to make. So that's where I would spend focus on the position, and I don't know what the interdisciplinary, but if one is more appropriate for the position, I'd probably spend more time on that one.
Yeah, and that actually brings up a good question about interdisciplinary work, non-traditional scholarship. Some of the panelists that have served on the P&T panel in the past have kind of addressed this issue of about where do you fall in terms of authorship, and in some disciplines, multiple authors are common. In other disciplines, if you don't have a single authorship publication, then it's not considered worthy, whereas publishing by yourself in an interdisciplinary type of field might be seen as, oh, maybe that's not so great. You should have worked with other people. And so I don't know, just some thoughts from the committee, from the university P&T committee. To what extent do people respect kind of a variety of scholarship? Or are they looking for a particular type, like, okay, you have to be first author, or if you have too many names on a paper, that's not a good sign. How does non-traditional or interdisciplinary types of scholarship, how is that viewed at the university level?
I would say we have some very healthy discussions on those very things within the committee. It's really interesting. There are usually some folks on the committee who can answer that very thing. For instance, in education, it's a very valued thing for us to write collaboratively, and so we can state that, and we have equal portions in our writing, and that's okay, and we value that. So there's usually someone on the committee who has some information on the discipline. So we do have those discussions. It's not like it's a blanket kind of look at everything. We have some healthy kinds of discussions about those very things, and the variability within all of our fields, because it's huge.
Every year I have to get tutorials from chemistry and biology on the order of the names and what it means, because it's so different from my own discipline. I know in business, which is my background, we tend to encourage, particularly people coming, new assistant professors coming up for associate and tenure, it's nice to have a single authored piece. That way there's not any question that you're able to do research, that you can do it on your own, and you got this published. And then we value co-authored pieces. We do pay attention sometimes to whose name is first and second. You don't want 8 people typically on an article in business. It's not necessary, whereas in some disciplines that's fine. But it varies a lot.
The one tip I would say is to make sure you put the, however your discipline works, put that in the CV. I mean, it can be in the narrative as well, but put a tidbit about it in the narrative, because, if somebody doesn't go to, put a tidbit about it in the CV as well, because if somebody doesn't go to the narrative, you want them to understand how your discipline works.
And remember, your dossier isn't going to be read just by your departmental colleagues. It's going to come to a university P&T committee, and they take their job very seriously, and they spend a lot of time with it, and you don't want them to be confused about the meaning.
One other quick thing, too, we wanted to talk about, too, John and I, look at the quality of your journals, too. There are several good lists that post predatory journals. We all get a gazillion emails to publish and all these different things. Really take heed, and do not let yourself fall in that predatory journal trap.
Do you know what she
several
means by
lists.
predatory
Do you know
journals?
what I
Do you know what
mean?
she's talking about? Because it's an unusual term.
I'm from the library. I'll just jump in.
Please do.
We would be glad to work with you on that. And I
Yay.
actually brought the quick sheets for the journal citation reports. If anybody wants to pick those up before you leave,
Terrific.
we can help with that part of the process.
That's a wonderful thing.
But you need to ask for that help
right
when you're
away.
sending your article out for review. Stay away from those journals, because again, the university committee, but probably your own departmental committee will simply discount those
Thank you.
down to zero. In fact, I would say it's worse than that.
It's a negative.
What are you doing publishing there? That's really a negative against you.
And a lot of our departments, this is new information. We've not dealt with this in the past. There used to be, a handful of predatory journals, John, and now the list is up into the hundreds.
Yeah.
And so we all need to take heed. And it was something that I've been in the field since the earth has been 3 days warm, and I wasn't just, it was a shock to me to see the numbers of predatory journals. That was a shock.
And
So
it
take
really
heed.
even applies to the organizations that you present papers at. There are a number of them where if you pay a pretty healthy submission fee, you'll get on the program and you'll have a presentation. And in some cases, they'll say they published proceedings. You won't get any credit for it if it's a sort of a pay-for-play organization. So be careful about that. I've seen that. In the last 2 years, I've seen 2 people pretty well shot down over that same issue.
I just had one other quick thing to add, and that is that candidates should make good use of the colleagues appraisal that's done in the mid-tenure year. Every candidate gets a tenure, every pre-tenure candidate gets a tenure appraisal every year from their chair. So every year a candidate has a pretty decent idea from their chair of whether they're making satisfactory or not satisfactory progress. And generally a chair should be pretty closely aligned. A chair's expectations should be fairly closely aligned with that of the rest of the tenured faculty. But sometimes in a field, priorities change or priorities start to shift, or the value of collaboration means different things to different members of the tenured faculty. And so when you have that opportunity to get the feedback of the colleagues' appraisal, who will ultimately be likely the group of people on your departmental committee, make use of that. That's the one formalized opportunity you have to hear from your tenured faculty, not from your chair. And so, you know, if you have any question about what they've put in that letter, you should meet them or talk with their chair or get with them so that you understand what your tenured faculty's expectations are. And then it's fair to pursue if there's a big incongruity between them and your chair to try to sort of get at that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting as people talk, it triggers another thought. All of the department chairs, I wish all of the department chairs were as conscientious as Rada or as Jennifer when she was a department chair. And most department chairs are very good, very conscientious. But if you suspect that your department chair is not being conscientious on your annual appraisals, that's where this tenure appraisal that comes from your colleagues and not from your chair is very, very important. We still have some department chairs that give everybody exceptional ratings and exceeds performance standards and so forth on everything. When you're in your heart of hearts, you may know I'm probably not an exceptional person. So pay attention to this tenure appraisal, because the people that evaluate you when you go up for promotion and tenure are not, I mean, only one of them is going to be your department chair. And so anyway, pay attention to that.
Yeah, and to reiterate that, you know, you said meet with that committee. It's their third-year review. If you have any questions, I would say meet with them regardless, right? Here's an opportunity that you can have a meaningful conversation with the colleagues within your department who are going to evaluate you a few years from now. You want to hear the good stuff. You want to hear the subtleties. You want to hear like what they emphasize. What are they thinking about when they look at your materials? So I would say whether it's good or bad, take that opportunity to have a great conversation with your colleagues about your scholarship and get a good understanding of what they expect in terms of scholarship and teaching and service.
Yeah.
I want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much. You've been so kind to answer our questions and respond to them effectively. And I just thank you all for coming as well. As the provost said, if you do have questions that linger and go on, and if you want to ask them anonymously, you can forward those to me, and I can ask them on your behalf and get back to you. So please avail yourself of that. Let's thank our panelists for being with us.